25 years ago, on what seemed like a peaceful evening in Maine, three teenagers left a movie theater to head home and vanished completely from the world. Not a single cry for help, not one clear trace, just bicycles abandoned on the side of a trail and the gut-wrenching panic of families waiting in desperation. As the search expanded, every lead gradually faded, leaving behind a string of unanswered questions and a community haunted by an eerie silence. Critical clues were overlooked, wrong assumptions sent the case off track, and the only person initially suspected slipped out of the spotlight. The case went cold over the years, as if the forests and mountains of Maine themselves had swallowed the truth. But time cannot bury everything. A new generation detective decided to reopen every page of the old files, and from the most seemingly ordinary details, a paper receipt, a tiny piece of fabric, a forgotten statement, an unexpected door cracked open. And when that door opened, it revealed a secret powerful enough to shake the entire state of Maine. Before we dive deep into this haunting journey, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love breathless true crime stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the next video. On a late fall evening in 1998, the small town of Millinocket, Maine, wore its familiar calm. Night was falling faster than usual, the air carried the cold scent of pine, and thin wisps of fog drifted between the low wooden houses. In a home on the edge of town, brothers Evan Porter and Liam Porter were getting ready to leave with their best friend Noah Briggs to catch the weekend evening show at the Magic Lantern Theater in Bridgeton, a little ritual the three of them looked forward to. Late that afternoon, the three teens pedaled out of the Porter neighborhood, the soft crunch of tires on damp pavement echoing in the quiet air. It wasn't fully dark yet, but the tall trees were already casting long shadows across the road. The pale yellow streetlights had just flickered on, creating hazy pools of light like an old film photograph. To the three kids, it was just a normal night, an easy ride to their favorite theater. When they reached the Magic Lantern Theater, the area was still fairly busy. Light from the red marquee reflected off the pavement, mixing with the classic smell of movie theater popcorn. Inside, the boys took seats near the middle and watched the scheduled film. Security footage captured them, leaving the theater around 7:45 p.m., walking out the main doors, zipping up their jackets against the cold wind, and talking quietly among themselves. One employee later recalled that the three paused for a few seconds right in front of the parking lot, as if watching something or trying to figure out their route through the hazy fog. The trip from the theater back to Millinocket was a familiar one, but on a fall night it felt emptier than usual. The teens planned to ride home together as always, Evan in front, Liam and Noah right behind. None of them knew this would be the last time anyone saw them on a safe road. At the Porter house, dinner was ready on the table, and the boys' parents kept glancing at the clock, waiting for the familiar sound of bikes out front. 8 o'clock passed, then almost 9, yet the house stayed unnaturally quiet. At first the family figured the kids might have stopped at a friend's house, but as the delay stretched on, unease set in. When they called the Briggs house, they got the same answer: Noah wasn't home either. Vague worry quickly turned into real fear. The Porters turned on the porch light, threw on coats, and went out searching the nearby streets. They followed the route the boys usually took, calling their names and checking the usual hangouts, but found nothing except the stillness of Millinocket at night. Neighbors said they hadn't seen any of the kids since dusk. Finally, after every familiar route had been searched with no sign of Evan, Liam, or Noah, and when the worry became impossible to brush off, the Porter family called the Millinocket Police Department to report 3 missing teenagers. The missing persons report from the Porter family reached the Millinocket Police Department late that night, and within minutes, the first 2 patrol cars were at the neighborhood. 3 teenagers disappearing together after a movie wasn't something this small town saw often, especially not Evan, Liam, and Noah, who were known as good kids who rarely stayed out late without telling an adult. Under the harsh blue-white beams of flashlights, officers began the first steps, confirming the time they left home, descriptions of the clothes they were wearing, the usual route they took after movies, and whether they might have stopped at a friend's house. Every answer pointed to the same thing: the three had left the theater, walked toward the main road, and then no one had seen them since. In Millinocket, something like this triggered an immediate community response, and that night was no exception. Even though it was late, neighbors grabbed coats and flashlights and started searching the familiar roads themselves. Police identified two priority areas: the surroundings of the Magic Lantern Theater in Bridgeton, and the route back to the Porter House. The Maine State Police K-9 unit was called in that same night, but they didn't arrive from Augusta until nearly dawn, when the search finally became more organized. At the theater area, officers checked the parking lot, the narrow roads behind the building, emergency exits, and the dark corners where kids sometimes waited for rides. There was no sign the boys had returned to the theater, and no one had heard shouting or a struggle. Officers followed the direction shown on camera, the paved road leading to the nearby neighborhood. That stretch was busy during the day, but at night it was just dim streetlights and tree shadows stretching across the shoulder. The search expanded along that road, yet still no trace the boys had ever passed through. Just after sunrise, Search Commander Don Kearns decided to deploy the K-9 teams along the wooded trail that ran between Bridgeton and Millinocket, a shortcut locals sometimes used. The dogs were brought to the spot the boys were most likely to have passed. While one group of officers searched houses and backyards along the main road, the K-9 unit moved into the trail that skirted the edge of Baxter Forest. It wasn't long before the dogs found the first item: Liam's bicycle lying on its side, next to a narrow section of trail, the front wheel caught on a small root, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. There was no damage, no long skid marks, or signs of a hard crash, which immediately made police wonder whether the bike had been placed there, or had fallen naturally. Finding the bicycle instantly raised the urgency. The trail where it was found was surrounded by dense pine forest. Early morning light barely filtered through, creating only thin streaks of visibility. Police marked the location, photographed it, and told the K-9 teams to keep following any remaining scent. Meanwhile, another group widened the search in both directions along the trail, assuming that if the three teams had been together, more belongings might be scattered nearby. Volunteers were mobilized in greater numbers. Within an hour, more than 30 people, neighbors, local store workers had gathered at the staging area, ready to fan out into the woods. The area was divided into large grid squares, and teams swept through in lines to make sure nothing was missed. Tension grew as the searched area expanded with still no sign of the boys. Liam's bicycle was the only solid lid, an important signal, but not enough to point the next direction. Police began considering the possibility that the three teams had left the trail at some point, or had been taken away in a vehicle without leaving obvious traces. As the sun came up fully, and the search moved into its next phase, the eastern forest and side trails were sealed off to prepare for a larger-scale sweep, the start of a series of major discoveries that would follow. The discovery of Liam's bicycle focused the search even more intensely on the trail and the surrounding forest. Shortly after widening the sweep, a group of volunteers on the northern edge of the woods found Evan's backpack lying next to a large tree trunk, a few hundred meters from the bicycle. The backpack wasn't torn or damaged, but its location was odd. It wasn't in the middle of the trail as if dropped while moving, but off to the side in thicker brush, as if it had been set down or lightly tossed there. Police quickly documented the position, the condition of the ground and leaves around it, and collected surface samples for later analysis. Personal items from one of the missing teens appearing scattered in the woods made investigators suspect the three had gone deeper into the area, or had been led there somehow. The search continued westward along the trail, and soon another police team discovered Noah's jacket, caught on a splintered section of an old fence at Pine Ridge Stables, a horse farm that had closed a few months earlier. The jacket had no major tears but was lightly soiled, and the zipper was slightly askew, giving the impression it had been pulled or snagged before falling. The spot was well off the route the kids normally used, and it wasn't a place local children usually hung out, especially at night. That made police take special note, because it suggested the three teens had been in that area sometime after leaving the theater. When officers examined the ground around the fence more closely, they found children's shoe prints in the soft dirt, not clear enough to identify the exact shoes, but the right size for Evan, Liam and Noah. A short distance away, they also noted deeper adult footprints off to the side, as if someone wearing larger shoes had walked through the same area around the same time the children's prints were made. Those adult prints led toward a side gate of Pine Ridge Stables, a little-used entrance that had fallen into disrepair after the farm shut down. The presence of adult footprints near the children's prints led police to hypothesize that the three teens may have been with an adult, whether willingly or not. With discovery after discovery centered around the farm, Pine Ridge Stables quickly became the new focal point of the search. The main gate was secured with an old chain, but the side gate opened with just a light push because the hinges were rotted. Inside, officers noted a wide dirt yard, abandoned wooden stalls, and equipment left behind from when the farm was still operating. Old saddles, plastic buckets, lead ropes and scattered pieces of lumber. In one stall near the tree line, the dirt floor looked lightly disturbed, not obvious enough to say it had definitely been tampered with recently, but enough for the team to flag it for closer examination. The other stalls yielded no direct clues about the boys, but police still swept the stables and the land behind them, using the K-9 teams to check every section. At the side gate entrance, 2 more sets of adult footprints were found, heading from the woods toward the farm's backyard. This suggested an adult had moved through there close to the time of the disappearance. Those prints were carefully documented for analysis, but because the soft soil had been slightly distorted by wind, no firm conclusions could be drawn yet. With the string of finds, Evan's backpack, Noah's jacket, and the shoe prints, all tied to the Pine Ridge Stables area, the search team designated the farm as the next primary zone. Police stationed officers at both gates and began pulling records of everyone who had worked there before it closed. Among those names, Kenneth Harrow, the farm's last stable hand, was immediately added to the list for questioning in the next phase of the investigation. Though at that point, he was considered only a potential witness, not yet a prime suspect. The discovery of scattered belongings from the 3 teenagers around the Pine Ridge Stables area prompted police to urgently revisit the landmarks that could pinpoint the last confirmed timeline when Evan, Liam, and Noah were seen. This phase of the investigation focused on gathering statements from everyone present at the movie theater that night, as well as anyone who lived or worked near the farm. Employees of the Magic Lantern Theater were the first to be interviewed. They clearly confirmed the exact moment the 3 boys left the theater. Right after the movie ended, the kids lingered for a few seconds by the door, as if deciding which way to go, then headed toward the main road. Security cameras captured the scene, giving police a relatively precise timestamp to reconstruct their route. The ticket seller said he noticed nothing unusual about the group, but vaguely recalled that as the 3 walked out, a strange man was standing near the parking lot area looking toward the theater entrance. Though he couldn't be identified on camera due to the angle, the employee described the man as tall, wearing a dark-colored baseball cap, and standing apart from the other patrons. While the description wasn't detailed enough to identify anyone, it was still entered into the file because it matched the vague recollection of several other moviegoers who also remembered a strange man hanging around the exit area that night. Once the theater vicinity was thoroughly checked, the investigation shifted back to Pine Ridge Stables, the location where 2 of the victims' items were found. The farm owner, who lived not far away, said the stables had been closed for months and almost no one came around anymore. He confirmed the last caretaker had been Kenneth Harrow, who used to feed the horses, clean the stalls, and lock the gates every day. The owner said Harrow quit before the place officially shut down and had no further contact with it afterward. Harrow lived alone in a rented house on the outskirts of Millinocket, rarely socialized much with townspeople, but had no obvious trouble or bad reputation. Police contacted Harrow for an initial statement. During questioning, Harrow remained calm and cooperative, saying he was at home that night and didn't go out. He admitted he knew Evan, Liam, and Noah because they had visited the farm to see the horses when it was still open, but denied seeing them the night they disappeared. When asked about the condition of the side gate and fencing, Harrow explained that after the farm closed, the owner stopped maintaining anything, so a misaligned gate or rotting fence wasn't unusual. Harrow's statement contained no obvious red flags, but it also didn't rule out the possibility that he was in the area that night, since no one could confirm his alibi. Police recorded the statement, but at that early stage he was treated only as a witness. There was no evidence yet to move him into suspect status. Meanwhile, another tip pushed the investigation in a noteworthy direction. A resident living near the trail bordering Baxter Forest reported seeing a dark green pickup truck driving through the area at a time that overlapped with when the three boys left the theater. The truck was moving unusually slowly, then suddenly sped up when it turned toward the vicinity of Pine Ridge Stables. The witness couldn't recall the license plate or clearly describe the driver, but the dark green color and body style were noted because they were common among rural Maine residents at the time. The detail was immediately added to the file because it lined up with the locations where Liam's bicycle and Evan's backpack were found, both along the route connecting the theater to the abandoned farm. Taken together, the statements began painting an initial picture. The three boys leave the theater, a strange man is present, the victim's belongings turn up near the closed farm, and a dark green pickup is spotted in the area. Though still far from conclusive, all these pieces led police to zero in on the time period immediately after the boys left the theater and the surrounding Pine Ridge Stables area, marking these as the two key focal points for the next phase of the investigation. The initial statements from the theater and the Pine Ridge Stables area gave police several anomalies to work with, but they weren't clear enough to point definitively in one direction. With no direct witnesses and no definitive trace of the boys' final movements, a new report from the interstate running through Maine suddenly shifted the investigation. A long-haul trucker who had left Massachusetts and passed through the Bridgeton area on the night of the disappearance had reportedly pulled over at a rest stop only a few miles from the Magic Lantern Theater. A local resident claimed to have seen that truck around the same time frame the boys left the theater, and in the frantic early search, the presence of an out-of-state vehicle became an overly emphasized lead. Early information also suggested the driver was in the area at an odd hour, not a typical time for truckers to stop. This caused police to temporarily treat him as a standout figure in the murky sequence of events that night. In the days that followed, investigators poured resources into locating and questioning the man. They contacted the trucking company, tracked his route, and it took nearly a week to reach him once his rig was deep inside New Hampshire. When questioned, the driver insisted the stop was only to check a tire and rest for a few minutes before continuing. He said he never saw the three kids or any other noteworthy vehicles, and never left the cab. Though the statement sounded reasonable, police still spent days verifying it through gas station records, toll receipts, and delivery logs to make sure nothing was missed. Every lead had to be checked manually. 1998 technology didn't yet allow quick cross-referencing, so the process dragged on and consumed significant time. Meanwhile, the evidence surfacing near Pine Ridge Stables, Noah's jacket, children's shoe prints, and adult footprints, should have received deeper priority analysis, but resources were diverted to chasing the out-of-state trucker lead. Notably, early in the investigation there had already been an important observation about Kenneth Harrow, the former stable caretaker. One officer who was present when Harrow was brought in to unlock gates for the search noticed Harrow seemed uneasy and avoided looking at the section of fence where Noah's jacket was found. The officer quickly jotted on a scrap of paper tucked into the case file, "Harrow, mud on boots, nervous demeanor. But because the whole team pivoted to pursuing the trucker, files were hastily reorganized, and the note got buried between two other reports. In the chaos of those first search days, no one noticed or pulled the note into the active clue chain. That oversight not only interrupted any deeper look at Harrow, but also caused the early connections between physical evidence and Pine Ridge stables to receive less attention while the team chased the out-of-state driver. Throughout the period they pursued this wrong direction, efforts that could have gone into a more thorough search of the stables, interviewing former farm employees, or collecting trace evidence around the fence line were delayed. When verification from the trucking company and the driver's log finally proved he had no involvement, investigators realized they had wasted nearly 3 weeks on a virtually worthless lead. When they returned to Pine Ridge stables, they essentially had to start over, but by then many surface traces had been washed or blown away by rain and wind. The original soil samples and shoe prints were no longer sharp enough for further analysis. The critical golden hours and days immediately after the boys vanished, widely regarded as the best window to establish investigative direction, had slipped away while the team pursued a complete dead end. That delay played a major role in pushing the case deeper into evidence scarcity. At the same time, missing the note about Harrow's odd behavior not only cost them a potential key lead, but prevented police from re-examining the chain of events near the farm sooner. Only after every trucker-related avenue was ruled out, did investigators begin looking at Pine Ridge stables again with fresh caution, but by then much of the scene was no longer intact. Once the Massachusetts trucker lead was confirmed worthless, Millinocket police were forced to circle back to the original focal areas, especially around Pine Ridge stables. However, more than 3 weeks had already passed since the night Evan, Liam and Noah vanished, far too long to preserve the fragile traces that Maine weather quickly erodes. The children's and adult footprints once documented were now completely obscured under fresh dirt. Any lingering scent the K9 units had picked up was gone. Soil and leaf samples collected where the backpack and jacket were found had been preserved, but 1998 forensic capabilities couldn't extract anything clear enough to move the case forward. Most critically, despite days of expanded searches, investigators never located any additional belongings, bodies or signs indicating the boys had left the area voluntarily or by force. The silence of the crime scene forced police to confront reality. There was no longer any direct evidence to determine whether the boys were dead or alive. That created a serious legal barrier. Without bodies, clear signs of assault, direct witnesses or strong physical evidence proving a crime, the case could not be upgraded to a criminal homicide investigation. Under the legal standards of the time, the 3 boys were classified as missing under suspicious circumstances, but the evidence threshold wasn't met to open a murder file or arrest anyone. This particularly affected the scrutiny of Kenneth Harrow, whose early behavior didn't fully align with the night's events. His statement wasn't contradictory enough to charge him, yet it also wasn't solid enough to clear him completely. However, without physical evidence or a direct witness to bolster suspicion, Harrow could not be detained or monitored long-term. After Pine Ridge stables officially closed, the former owner put the land up for sale, and the entire property was abandoned. Activity around the area dwindled, causing most potential signs from any movements that night to fade over time. Harrow, after quitting, left Millinocket and moved to Auburn, a quieter town farther south, where he rented a small house and took seasonal labor jobs. His relocation couldn't legally be treated as evidence of guilt. Many local workers lived the same transient lifestyle, especially after losing farm jobs. Police noted his new address, but had no legal basis for further surveillance. As winter approached, volunteer search teams thinned out. Local police had to return to handling the town's regular cases. Periodic sweeps continued in Baxter Forest and around Pine Ridge stables, but yielded no new leads. Every section of the farm and forest corridor had already been searched so thoroughly that nothing more could be found by the naked eye. After several months with zero progress, The disappearance of Evan, Liam, and Noah was officially reclassified as inactive pending new information. Items like the backpack, jacket, and bicycle were kept in evidence storage, but at that stage they provided no further scientific insight, only initial traces the investigation had failed to connect. By early the following year, Millinocket Police and Maine State Police agreed the case had exceeded normal investigative capacity. The file was moved to a temporary pending new leads list. Eventually, all documents, notes, statements, and evidence were transferred to the Maine State Police Cold Case Unit, which handles long-term unsolved disappearances. The Millinocket 3-teen disappearance, once a massive search full of hope, quietly joined the state's list of unanswered cases. No one realized that among the documents boxed up that day, the scrap of paper noting Kenneth Harrow's suspicious behavior lay buried between two reports, unnoticed and untouched for nearly the next 15 years. By 2013, nearly 15 years after the disappearance of Evan Porter, Liam Porter, and Noah Briggs, the Millinocket 3 file still sat untouched in the Maine State Police Cold Case Archives. When Detective Marisa Donnelly was transferred to the unit, she was tasked with reviewing old cases that could potentially be reopened thanks to advances in modern forensic technology. Out of hundreds of dusty files, the Millinocket 3 caught Donnelly's attention, not because it contained a wealth of evidence, but precisely because of how little there was: a scattered chain of physical items, limited traces, and no conclusive findings. Yet everything revolved around a single movement path on the night in 1998. Donnelly spent days poring over every page: search reports, witness statements, scene reports, maps of the Pine Ridge Stables area, and notes related to the Magic Lantern Theater. Cross-referencing the documents, she noticed several leads that had never been properly pursued, especially the farm itself, where belongings of 2 of the 3 teens had surfaced. Though the file stated the property had been rechecked, there were no crime scene photos, no marked diagrams, and no detailed forensic reports. This suggested the re-examination of the farm had been rushed, especially after investigators shifted focus to the Massachusetts truck driver lead. While re-examining the entire file, Donnelly discovered something unexpected: a small note clipped between 2 reports, its edges yellowed with age and never catalogued. It contained just a few lines describing how Kenneth Harrow, the last stable hand at Pine Ridge Stables, showed up with muddy boots and a tense demeanor when he helped unlock the gate for police in 1998. What struck Donnelly wasn't the content itself, but the fact that this note never made it into any official report. There was no indication it had ever been evaluated or added to the suspect list. In Harrow's 1998 interview transcript, questions to him were limited to whether he had seen the 3 teens and whether any strangers had been on the property. There were no questions about his alibi, his movements that night, or the vehicle he drove. Donnelly realized the original investigation had quickly veered toward the truck driver, causing even small but promising details tied to Pine Ridge Stables and Harrow to be sidelined. She compiled a list of points that deserved fresh scrutiny: children's shoe prints mixed with adult footprints near the fence, the odd placement of Noah's jacket and Evan's backpack, inconsistent with their usual route, the sighting of a strange man near the theater, and Harrow's abrupt departure from Millinocket shortly after the stables closed. What made the case even more compelling was the context of 1998. Forensic technology at the time couldn't analyze soil samples, trace fibers, or touch DNA. So much of the evidence remained untapped. By 2013, those tools were powerful enough to yield information that had previously been impossible to obtain. That meant the Millinocket 3 had a strong chance of being reopened if the old evidence was retested. Finding the forgotten note became the final push for Donnelly to move the file to the priority pile. The note proved that even back then someone had noticed Harrow acting strangely, but that suspicion got lost among other investigative threads. Donnelly understood her first step wasn't to rush into lab testing, but to reconstruct the entire timeline of the disappearance night, and re-ask questions of the name that had once been brushed aside: Kenneth Harrow. After discovering the overlooked note about Harrow and listing the points that needed re-examination, Detective Marisa Donnelly began preparing a plan to fully reconstruct the events of the disappearance night. However, before she could finish sorting the paperwork, a new piece of information surfaced, one powerful enough to shift the entire direction of the investigation. In early 2019, the Cold Case Unit received a call from Caleb Norton, a resident of Brunswick on Maine's southern coast. Norton said he had lived in Millinocket in the late 1990s and had briefly known Kenneth Harrow because they once worked the same temporary warehouse job. What Norton reported immediately grabbed Donnelly's attention. He recalled that around 2001, during a drinking gathering at a friend's house, Harrow had made a cryptic remark that unsettled everyone. He knew something about the Millinocket teen's disappearance. According to Norton, Harrow didn't elaborate or directly claim involvement, but the way he said it, half joking, half smug, stuck with him. At the time, Norton assumed Harrow was drunk and just bragging, since the whole town had talked about the case for years. But decades later, when Norton saw news that Cold Case was reviewing old files, he felt he should finally report what he'd heard, even if it was 20 years late. What especially caught Donnelly's interest was that Norton had no idea Harrow ever worked at Pine Ridge Stables, a detail in the file but not widely known in the community. Yet Harrow still dropped a hint about the disappearance, at a time when almost no one was talking about it anymore. This was the kind of inside knowledge comment that usually only comes from someone who actually knows something. Donnelly immediately asked Norton to come to Maine State Police headquarters for a formal statement. The interview was conducted cautiously. Norton described Harrow as a loner who kept to himself and was generally seen as standoffish. He said that during the drinking session, Harrow never gave specifics, just vague lines like the police looked in all the wrong places, and if they knew what he knew, those 3 kids would have been found. Though the remarks could be dismissed as drunken nonsense, when viewed against the full case and the original investigative gaps, they became a lead that could not be ignored. After hearing everything, Donnelly cross-checked it against existing evidence, scattered belongings around the old farm, adult footprints mixed with children's near the fence, the forgotten note about Harrow's tense, muddy appearance when unlocking the stable gate, his quick exit from Millinocket after the stables closed, and now a 2001 insinuation that he knew something. Taken together, Harrow was no longer a peripheral witness. He was the only person directly connected both to the location where evidence appeared and to multiple behavioral red flags. Moreover, the timing of Harrow's comment in 2001, when the initial trails were going cold, raised the question, did he know why the police never found anything more? Was he directly involved, or did he learn something from someone else? To avoid speculation, Donnelly immediately pulled Harrow's full background, residence history, employment records, vehicles owned, and any legal issues. The search showed no serious criminal record, just minor infractions tied to seasonal labor jobs. But there were large gaps between 1998 and the early 2000s where his activities were unclear, making further checking essential. Donnelly submitted a report to her superiors requesting the Millinocket 3 be moved to high priority status, based on the potential for reopening with modern forensics. She specifically emphasized the need to re-interview Harrow and to retest the 1998 evidence using new techniques, touch DNA, microfiber analysis, and mineral testing. Norton's late statement didn't just revive the Harrow angle, it gave Donnelly the leverage to restructure the entire case into something more logical. A disappearance that hadn't simply been forgotten, but one that had been misdirected from the very first days. With that determination, Donnelly officially moved the Millinocket 3 into the active cold case reactivation group, entering a phase the case had never reached before. After the late statement from Brunswick reopened the Kenneth Harrow lead, Detective Marisa Donnelly moved to the most critical step, retesting every piece of 1998 evidence with modern forensic technology. What had once been considered too faint or impossible to analyze could now become the key, because advances in DNA sequencing, microfiber analysis, and mineral comparison had completely changed what was possible. The first item re-examined was Noah's jacket, found years earlier on the Pine Ridge Stables fence. In 1998, investigators could only note dirt and a crooked zipper. This time, the lab extracted dozens of microfiber samples from the fabric and compared them to synthetic fiber databases. The results showed the fibers matched the exact material used for seat upholstery and floor mats in 1993 Ford F-150 pickup trucks. While that model was common in rural Maine, the finding proved Noah's jacket had direct recent contact with the interior of such a truck before it snagged on the fence. The detail lined up perfectly with a witness who reported seeing a dark green pickup near Pine Ridge Stables the night the boys vanished. The second item was a small dark smear on the fence where Noah's jacket was caught. In 1998, it was noted but unidentifiable. Using ultra-sensitive touch DNA techniques, analysts carefully lifted residual skin cells from the wood surface. After multiple amplification rounds, they obtained a profile that matched Evan Porter's DNA, stored in the missing persons database. This was the first physical proof that Evan had been at the farm fence, strongly supporting the theory that at least one of the three teens had direct contact with Pine Ridge Stables very close to the time of disappearance. Next, Donnelly focused on what had previously been dismissed as nearly useless: the dirt inside Evan's backpack. In 1998, it was simply called forest soil. With modern mineral analysis, the lab discovered an unusually high ratio of hematite and magnetite, distinctive and not common in Baxter State Park or the Millinocket residential area. When compared to Maine's geological database, the soil matched exactly the ground composition at Katahdin Iron Works, a remote forested mountainous area more than 30 miles from Millinocket. This was a major breakthrough. Evan's backpack had contacted soil from Katahdin Iron Works, meaning the boys had been taken far beyond the original search perimeter, to a seldom visited region where the old iron mines had long been abandoned. The timeline of the case began to shift. Pine Ridge Stables was no longer the only linked location. There was now a second, much more remote site, deep in the woods. Combining the three new forensic findings: microfibers from a Ford F-150 interior, Evan's DNA on the fence, and Katahdin Iron Works soil in the backpack, Donnelly built a logical chain that had never existed before. Noah contacted the interior of an F-150 truck. A witness saw a dark green pickup near the farm the night of the disappearance. Evan left DNA on the Pine Ridge Stables fence. Evan's backpack contained soil from Katahdin Iron Works. Kenneth Harrow worked at Pine Ridge Stables and likely had access to an older pickup truck. Though still no direct charging evidence, for the first time every item pointed to the same sequence: leaving the theater, appearing near the farm, being moved in a pickup truck, ending up in the remote Katahdin Iron Works area. Crucially, every location was easily accessible to Harrow, either while he worked at the stables or afterward. The forensic re-examination also revealed the items had not been randomly planted. The backpack and jacket were found in different spots, but both near entrances or convenient access points, as if someone had passed through the area and discarded them while moving. After receiving the full lab reports, Donnelly officially changed the Millinocket 3 file status from a disappearance of unknown cause to a criminal case showing clear signs of victim transport across multiple locations. At this point, Harrow was no longer a background witness. He was the person who needed to be re-interviewed with all the new evidence on the table. Donnelly prepared for the next critical phase, confronting Kenneth Harrow after more than 15 years of the case lying dormant. With the new forensic results showing that all three teenagers had contact with Pine Ridge Stables, the interior of an older Ford F-150, and soil from the Katahdin Iron Works area, Detective Marisa Donnelly knew the time had come to re-interview Kenneth Harrow, someone who had once been considered only a minor witness, but was now at the center of intersecting physical evidence. The interview was arranged at the Maine State Police Barracks in Gray, where Harrow agreed to show up after being told it was to provide additional documentation for an old case. Donnelly deliberately kept the session low-key at first, wanting to observe his natural reactions as the events were brought up again. In the opening minutes, Harrow's voice remained steady, repeating his original statement that on the night the three teenagers vanished, he was home alone, hadn't gone to the farm, and hadn't seen anyone. As Donnelly began pressing deeper, tension in Harrow's body language gradually became visible. Donnelly laid out a timeline based on the old files and asked Harrow to confirm each point, when exactly he had left Pine Ridge Stables that week, whether he had gone out that evening, whether he had used his personal vehicle. Harrow repeatedly insisted he never left the house and his truck hadn't moved that night. That was the first contradiction. Instead of confronting him immediately, Donnelly shifted to updates from new witnesses, including a report of a dark green pickup seen passing the movie theater area and heading toward the farm during the window when the three boys left the theater. When she mentioned the color of the truck, Harrow hesitated, just a small pause, but Donnelly noted it. More importantly, when she asked what vehicle he owned at the time, he first said an old pickup, not sure of the model, then admitted it was an early 1990s Ford F-150, exactly the same make and era as the microfiber found on Noah's jacket. Though still circumstantial, the conflict between Harrow's claim of never used the truck that night and the forensic evidence led Donnelly to pivot to a direct timeline confrontation. She produced old vehicle maintenance records the team had located in local archives, showing that Harrow had taken the truck in just days after the disappearance for new floor mats and a full interior cleaning. That detail clearly rattled him. Harrow said the truck was old and needed regular work, but offered no plausible reason for replacing the mats at that exact sensitive moment. Donnelly then reminded him of his 1998 statement that he never went near the theater that night. After more than 15 years, Harrow apparently believed the old files were too scattered to cross-check, but Donnelly had located another piece of data, preserved cell tower records from the telecom company, not precise enough for modern GPS location, but sufficient to show Harrow's phone had pinged a tower near Bridgeton, more than a half-hour drive from his home. When she brought that up, Harrow flinched, and for the first time, changed his story. He said he might have driven out to buy something, but didn't remember clearly. The shift from completely at home to maybe went out was significant. Donnelly kept going, moving to the physical evidence, Evan Porter's DNA on the Pine Ridge Stables fence, evidence that 1998 technology couldn't process but modern testing had now identified. At the mention of DNA, Harrow avoided eye contact and began offering scattered explanations that kids came to the farm all the time, yet he couldn't explain why Evan's DNA was on the outer fence line, a spot only reachable by someone approaching from the woods side. Donnelly used an indirect approach, asking layered questions. Was Harrow anywhere near Pine Ridge Stables during the week of the disappearance? Had anyone ever borrowed or taken his truck without his knowledge? Did he remember going anywhere that night, even for a short drive? The more he answered, the more tangled his statements became. He would deny, then qualify. Insist, then doubt his own words. Contradiction piled on contradiction, and in the process, Donnelly got what she needed. Harrow could no longer maintain the timeline he had stuck to for 15 years. She ended the session without making any accusation. That wasn't the goal that day. What she achieved was Harrow contradicting himself on the record, opening the possibility that he had been near the theater and Pine Ridge Stables the night the three teenagers disappeared. The new forensic traces combined with the inconsistencies in his statements convinced Donnelly that Harrow was no longer just a witness. He had become the prime suspect. For the next step, she needed one more element to support an arrest warrant, an independent witness or piece of evidence, placing Harrow himself near the theater during the critical time window. That led her to the next phase of the investigation, finding the person who might have seen Harrow without realizing they had held a key clue for 2 decades. After the second interview with Kenneth Harrow, where he repeatedly contradicted himself about his movements the night of the disappearance, Detective Marisa Donnelly realized that one additional independent point, confirming Harrow's presence near Bridgeton or Pine Ridge stables that evening, would give her probable cause for an arrest warrant. Forensics had dragged Harrow back into the center of the case. His own statements had heightened suspicion, but to charge him, she needed a witness unconnected to anyone in the original file. That lead appeared almost by chance. While Donnelly was mapping the routes Harrow was most likely to have taken in 1998, she plotted the roads connecting Millinocket to Bridgeton and marked possible stops, parking lots, gas stations, 24-hour stores. One was a small gas station on Route 302, located between the Magic Lantern Theater and the turnoff toward Millinocket. The station was still in business, though under different owners, and was one of the few places that still kept paper receipts by year for tax purposes. Donnelly visited the station to ask about old records and was introduced to Sarah Clay, who had worked there since the late 90s. When Donnelly mentioned the disappearance case, Clay went quiet for a few seconds, then said she clearly remembered one detail. That night a man driving a dark green pickup had stopped for gas, seemed in a hurry, and barely spoke. When Donnelly showed her photos from the 1998 file, Clay immediately identified the man as Kenneth Harrow. According to Clay, the station had been dead empty, and only Harrow came inside to pay cash. Clay described him wearing a dark baseball cap, matching the theater employee's description of a strange man seen near the entrance. For a memory more than 20 years old, the match was striking, but the real breakthrough was the paper receipt. Clay took Donnelly to the storage room in back, where old boxes were stacked by year. After some digging, they opened the box labeled 1998, Q4. Inside were faded but legible receipt rolls. Filtering by the relevant date and time window, Donnelly found one that read 8:14 p.m. Regular gas. Paid cash. Clay confirmed she had printed that receipt herself, and that between 8 o'clock and 9 p.m., she had served only one customer. The man in the dark green F-150. When cross-referenced with the theater's security footage, the 3 boys were seen leaving around 7:45 p.m. The distance from the theater to the gas station perfectly fit Harrow, appearing at 8:14 p.m. That single receipt destroyed his prior claim that he never drove anywhere that night. The station's location was also strategic. Anyone leaving Bridgeton toward Pine Ridge Stables or Millinocket had to pass that stretch of Route 302. That meant Harrow was traveling the exact route the 3 teenagers most likely took. When Donnelly layered this with the earlier forensic evidence, microfiber from an F-150 interior, Evans' DNA on the Pine Ridge fence, Katahdin Ironworks soil in Evans' backpack, together with Clay's statement and the receipt, the picture became clearer than ever. Harrow had been near the theater via the gas station, near Pine Ridge Stables via physical evidence and DNA, driving a vehicle that matched the microfiber traces. Add the fact that he replaced the truck's carpets and had the interior cleaned days after the disappearance, and the timeline he had insisted on fell apart completely. Sarah Clay became the crucial link, completely independent, unknown to the Porter or Briggs families, no prior connection to Harrow, memory tied to a specific receipt with an exact timestamp. That satisfied the legal requirement to treat Harrow as a suspect who was provably in the area at the time of the crime. Leaving the gas station, Donnelly knew she finally had the last piece to move from suspicion to action. With the forensic evidence, Harrow's contradictory statements, and a new witness placing him in the theater area, the chain of proof was now strong enough to convince the prosecutor to support search and arrest warrants. The Millinocket 3 case, silent for so long, had entered a phase it had never reached in nearly 2 decades. With Sarah Clay's statement, the paper receipt documenting Harrow's presence on Route 302, and the chain of forensic evidence directly linking the three teenagers to Pine Ridge Stables, Detective Marisa Donnelly finally had everything needed to move to the decisive phase, requesting arrest and search warrants for Kenneth Harrow. The affidavit was meticulously prepared, structured in clear layers, and submitted to the Cumberland County District Attorney's Office. In the summary, Donnelly highlighted three core points. Harrow had lied about his timeline, specifically denying that he left home or used his truck that night. Forensic evidence proved the three teenagers had contact with the interior of an older Ford F-150, the exact type of vehicle Harrow owned. Evan's DNA was on the Pine Ridge Stables fence, property Harrow managed and had easy access to. When the independent gas station clerk's statement and the receipt timed perfectly with the boys leaving the theater were added, prosecutors agreed there was probable cause that Harrow was in the immediate area of the disappearance and may have transported the victims that night, in 1998. With all those factors, the local court quickly approved both the search warrant and an emergency arrest warrant. The next morning, a combined team of Maine State Police, the Violent Crimes Task Force, and forensic investigators was dispatched to the Auburn area, where Harrow had lived since the early 2000s. His small house sat at the end of a quiet dead-end road, removed from denser neighborhoods. When police approached, Harrow appeared shocked and confused but did not resist. He was handcuffed at the front door, while the search team began a full sweep of the house, garage, and the pickup truck parked in the driveway. During the search, the first thing they focused on was the still-running dark green Ford F-150, though it showed signs of multiple interior replacements over the years. Forensic techs immediately took microfiber samples from the seats, floor mats, and door panels for comparison with the fibers found on Noah's jacket. While searching the detached garage, the team discovered a large plastic bin containing old items, horse leads, a length of weathered rope, metal hooks, and remnants of saddlery, all consistent with equipment used at Pine Ridge Stables in the late 1990s. Although just farm gear, their presence at Harrow's home years after the stable closed raised the question, why keep tools from a job he had only briefly held? The next major find came from a wooden drawer in the garage, a pair of old children's shoes, small size, faded and worn. The concern was not the shoes themselves, but the fact that none of the three families recognized them as belonging to Evan, Liam, or Noah in 1998. The style was common in the early to mid-1990s for kids age 7, 10, but ownership could not yet be determined. Though inconclusive at the moment, the discovery put the team on high alert, suggesting the possibility that Harrow might be linked to another incident authorities had never known about. Throughout the rest of the search, additional soil samples were collected from tools, the truck bed, and the rear entrance area of the house. Comparing those samples with the soil analysis from Evan's backpack would determine whether Harrow had ever been in the Katahdin Ironworks region. By this point, the evidence was more than sufficient to hold Harrow for formal Miranda questioning. As the patrol car took Harrow away from his Auburn home, Donnelly watched the F-150 being loaded onto a forensic transport truck. Every layer of evidence uncovered in the past 2 weeks, microfiber, DNA, the gas station receipt, the contradictory timelines, all pointed to this one man. The search had not only solidified the case, but also raised a larger question tied to the unidentified children's shoes. Donnelly knew arresting Harrow was only the beginning. What mattered now was the next interrogation, where Harrow would face the full weight of the newly collected evidence, and where the truth about that night in 1998, finally, had a chance to surface after nearly 2 decades. After being transported to Maine State Police Headquarters, Kenneth Harrow was taken into the interrogation room, where Detective Marisa Donnelly had already prepared a strategy built on the entire chain of freshly collected forensic evidence. At first, Harrow stuck to the stance he had repeated for years: total denial, insisting that on the night the three teenagers went missing, he was at home, didn't drive anywhere, didn't see anyone, and had nothing to do with it. His voice stayed even, and he tried to appear calm, but Donnelly was used to this kind of defense. She didn't confront him directly. Instead, she started with seemingly neutral details: the location of Pine Ridge stables, the time he left the farm before closing, the kinds of work he used to do there. Only after Harrow started to relax did Donnelly introduce the first piece of evidence: the microfiber from Noah's jacket that exactly matched the interior of a 1993 Ford F-150. At that, Harrow faltered for a moment, but still denied it, claiming the truck was old and a lot of people had borrowed it. Donnelly didn't argue. She moved on to the second piece: Evan Porter's DNA on the Pine Ridge stables fence. For the first time in the interview, Harrow lost his composure. He avoided eye contact, and offered the excuse that kids used to run all around the farm back then, but that explanation didn't fit the location of the DNA sample on the outside of the fence, a spot only reachable by someone coming in from the forest side. Donnelly then laid down the most critical piece: the 8:14 p.m. gas station receipt, printed by witness Sarah Clay, who had positively identified Harrow as the man filling up that night, the same night the teens vanished. This directly contradicted his claim of being home all evening. When asked why he had denied it before, Harrow shifted his tone, saying he didn't remember clearly, or didn't think it mattered. That was the moment Harrow began moving from outright denial to partial admission. He conceded he might have driven out for a bit, but insisted he never saw the kids and had nothing to do with their disappearance. Donnelly stayed calm and presented the third forensic link: soil in Evan's backpack that was an exact match for the Katahdin Iron Works forest area, more than 30 miles from Millinocket. Donnelly explained that the soil match was not random. It meant the three teenagers, or their belongings, had been taken there, and Harrow's F-150, according to 1998 repair records, was fully capable of traveling the trails leading to Katahdin. At that detail, Harrow went silent longer than usual. It was clear the chain of evidence was closing every gap in his story. Finally, he admitted he had seen the three kids near the farm, but stressed he only meant to tell them to go home early. When asked why he had previously denied any contact at all, Harrow said he was afraid of being blamed. Donnelly pressed harder. Why were microfibers from his truck on Noah's jacket? Why was Evan's DNA on the fence? And why were the boys' belongings scattered along a path leading to the farm? Harrow claimed the kids climbed into the truck on their own when he offered them a short ride, but insisted he dropped them off near the farm and left. That story still didn't explain the Katahdin soil in the backpack. When asked about the area, Harrow continued to deny taking anyone there, yet admitted he did drive in that direction that night, because he felt like taking a drive on the old trails he used when he worked at the farm. Donnelly carefully noted the detail, not because she believed him, but because it opened a way to verify the actual route using topographic maps and travel times. The interrogation continued with questions about the exact time Harrow left Pine Ridge stables that evening, whether he met anyone else, and why he replaced the truck's carpet and thoroughly cleaned the interior just days after the disappearance. Harrow offered no reasonable explanation. He only repeated that the truck was dirty or needed repairs. Donnelly saw the answers sliding away from logic and even contradicting themselves. By the end of the session, Harrow admitted only three things. He had seen the three teenagers that night. He had given them a ride for a short distance. He had driven toward the Katahdin Iron Works forest that night, but he continued to deny any violence or intent to harm. For Donnelly, these admissions, despite the remaining gaps, were a critical sign. For the first time in 15 years, Harrow had cracked the consistency of his denials. What he said not only provided new information about the route, but pointed directly to a location likely tied to the boys' disappearance. As the interrogation ended, Donnelly knew it was time to investigate what Harrow had left unsaid, especially the remote forest area near Katahdin Iron Works, where he had now admitted driving that night, in 1998. After the interrogation in which Kenneth Harrow first admitted seeing the three teenagers and driving toward Katahdin Iron Works the night they vanished, Detective Marisa Donnelly understood the case had shifted from confrontation to forcing the suspect to reveal what he was still hiding. The contradictions in his statements, combined with forensics and route data, left Harrow unable to maintain the no-involvement story he had held for 15 years. The next day, in a follow-up session, Donnelly steered the interview toward cooperating to clarify the truth, an approach that often pushes wavering suspects past their breaking point. When asked to describe the exact route he took that night, Harrow dodged several times before giving fragmented details: an old dirt turnoff, a trail once used by farm workers, and a stop because he heard a noise. The pieces seemed random, yet they matched remarkably well with the trail system around Katahdin Iron Works, a former iron mining area, now reclaimed by dense forest. When Donnelly asked directly whether he would be willing to lead police to the exact spot where he stopped the truck that night, Harrow stayed silent for a long time, then reluctantly nodded. That same day, Maine State Police deployed a special search team to the area. Harrow, handcuffed, rode in a patrol car behind Donnelly's convoy. The route he directed them along wound through deep woods, old dirt roads, and rocky slopes typical of the abandoned mining area. Finally, the vehicle stopped at a deserted quarry pit, deep inside the thick forest, an utterly isolated place, far from any main road and nearly impossible to stumble upon by chance. Still cuffed, Harrow pointed toward a low-lying area near the edge of the quarry, but refused to step out of the vehicle. Donnelly marked the spot, then ordered the forensic team to begin scanning with ground-penetrating radar (GPR). Within minutes, the GPR screen showed two clear anomalies beneath the soil: a longer, wider disturbance about 1 meter deep, a smaller disturbance slightly off to the right. These were unmistakable signs of soil that had been dug up and refilled, completely different from the surrounding natural layers. The technicians marked the locations and began careful hand digging to preserve evidence. In the first pit, after removing a layer of mixed dirt and rock fragments, they uncovered a faded piece of fabric, then a child-size sneaker lace that matched the style worn by Evan, Liam, or Noah's age group. Digging deeper, the team recovered a small bone fragment consistent with a teenage skeleton. The items were photographed, tagged, and sampled according to protocol. Scattered in the pit was also a button identical to the type the Porter family had described on the clothes Evan wore that day. The second pit yielded different results: no bones, but several scattered personal items, an old shirt fragment that didn't match any clothing of the three known victims, plastic toy pieces, and a child's glove smaller than anything Evan, Liam, or Noah would have worn. The existence of this second pit required its own report, because it suggested possible involvement of another child, not connected to the Millinocket 3 case. Although identity and timing remained unknown, the nature of the items indicated Harrow may have used the site more than once. While the forensic team continued collecting soil fibers and objects, Harrow stood at a distance under guard, showing almost no reaction. He neither denied nor explained. He simply stared at the ground, looking exhausted, as if he knew whatever lay beneath that soil had ended any chance of further concealment. When the on-site work concluded, Donnelly filed a preliminary report. Pit 1 contained items and remains consistent with the three teenagers missing since 1998. Pit 2 contained unidentified children's items, possibly linked to a separate incident. For legal security, the entire area was sealed off for potential future excavation. Additional GPR scans of nearby ground revealed no other anomalies in the immediate vicinity. The discovery of the two burial pits, especially the one containing items matching the victims, marked the shift from suspicion to confirmation of criminal acts. Even without final DNA results, the evidence virtually guaranteed the remains belonged to the Millinocket teenagers. At the same time, the second pit opened a secondary investigative thread, nothing conclusive yet, but significant enough for Donnelly to flag it as a major open question. As the convoy left the quarry and headed back to headquarters, Donnelly knew the case had entered a new phase, no longer a puzzle of scattered evidence and vague statements. They had found the burial site, and now all that remained was confirming identities, reconstructing the timeline, and forcing Harrow to face the full truth of that night in 1998. The evidence and bone fragments recovered from the abandoned quarry were rushed that same night to the State Forensic Lab in Bangor. Detective Marisa Donnelly stayed at the facility almost continuously, because she knew these results would not only determine the charges against Kenneth Harrow, but would finally end more than 2 decades of anguish for the Porter and Briggs families. The forensic team began by cataloging the items: buttons, shoelaces, fabric scraps, small bone fragments, and attached soil. Every piece was photographed, coded, sealed, and sent through its own analysis pipeline. The bone fragments from the first pit received top priority. Despite extensive decomposition over the years, their structure and size were consistent with teenage individuals. Extracting DNA from the old bones required multiple cleaning, amplification, and noise filtering steps. It wasn't until the 3rd day after collection that the lab sent Donnelly the first notification. The first DNA sample was a perfect match to Evan Porter's missing person profile. Donnelly received the news in silence. She knew this match carried enormous legal weight. It proved Evan had been at the burial site, and almost certainly died there. But she also knew it would be the final blow for the boy's family. On the 4th day, the next report arrived. The second DNA sample matched Liam Porter. With both Porter brothers confirmed, the lab focused entirely on the remaining fragments. One sample was harder to process, but eventually yielded a result match with Noah Briggs's profile. All 3 Millinocket teenagers were positively identified, ending any lingering hope that one might still be alive. The forensic report stated clearly, the degree of decomposition was consistent with nearly 25 years, and no evidence of any additional complete skeleton was found in the first pit. This reinforced the conclusion that the site was where Harrow had buried the victims after the night they disappeared. Meanwhile, a separate team analyzed the items from the second, smaller pit, which contained no bones or organic tissue sufficient for DNA testing, but several notable objects: a children's shirt fragment from the early 1990s, a glove too small for Evan, Liam, or Noah, plastic toy pieces common between 1990 and 1995. None of the items matched descriptions of the 3 known victims. This forced Donnelly to add a critical note to the report: cannot rule out the possibility that the second pit is connected to another as yet unidentified young individual. She made no premature conclusions. Objects alone do not prove another victim. But the deliberate burial of children's items in a separate pit was impossible to ignore, as potential evidence that Harrow may have brought another child to the area, either before or after the Millinocket 3. Even though that theory required further investigation, the forensic results had pushed the case into irreversible territory. Harrow had not merely encountered the 3 teenagers. He had transported them far from Millinocket, and ultimately buried their remains at the quarry near Katahdin Iron Works. The complete forensic report was forwarded to the prosecutor's office and Maine State Police, with the conclusion: the deaths of the 3 Millinocket teenagers are confirmed as homicide. Donnelly read every page again, then closed the file. This was the strongest foundation for holding Harrow fully accountable under the law. Yet the existence of the second burial pit meant she could not treat this as complete closure. The next step would be reconstructing the full timeline for prosecution, and confronting Harrow directly with evidence he could no longer dodge for even a minute. After the forensic results confirmed the remains of Evan Porter, Liam Porter, and Noah Briggs, Detective Marisa Donnelly moved to the critical next step, compiling all evidence and building the prosecution file. This was the phase that shifted the case from investigation to criminal indictment, and every detail had to be presented in a logical, clear sequence, strong enough to convince both the grand jury and the Maine State Prosecutor's Office. Donnelly began by connecting every piece of data into a single unified timeline. Using theater surveillance footage, the gas station receipt, forensic results and Harrow's statements, she reconstructed the sequence of the night in 1998 as follows. 7:45 p.m. The three teenagers left the Magic Lantern Theater, approx. 8 p.m. A witness described a strange man near the theater entrance. 8:14 p.m. The gas receipt confirmed Harrow filled up on Route 302, only minutes from the theater. Approx. 8:30 p.m. Evans and Noah's belongings appeared near Pine Ridge Stables. Evans' DNA was recovered from the fence. After 8:30 p.m., Harrow admitted the kids got in the truck for a short ride. Late that night, Harrow drove toward Katahdin Iron Works, the location where the remains were later found. When Donnelly placed the physical evidence onto this timeline, the entire journey became unmistakable. There was no gap in the chain of events that separated Harrow from the victims. From the initial contact, the location of his truck, the movement out of town, and finally to the quarry, everything fell within the window when he had control and no alibi. The forensic evidence played the decisive role in the prosecution package. Microfibers from Noah's jacket matched the interior of Harrow's 1993 Ford F-150. Evans' DNA was found on the Pine Ridge Stables fence, an area Harrow used to manage. Soil inside Evans' backpack matched the Katahdin Iron Works region. The remains of all three boys were recovered from the burial pit that Harrow himself led police to. In parallel, Harrow's statements were divided into two categories: what he admitted and what contradicted the evidence, an essential point in the prosecution strategy. Key contradictions included: statement never left the house, contradicted by the gas receipt plus witness placing him on Route 302, denied ever meeting the boys, later admitted, gave them a short ride after forensic confrontation, denied going to Katahdin, admitted, turned that way, when questioned about the soil sample, claimed he dropped the boys near the farm, contradicted by the location where the bodies were found. From these inconsistencies, Donnelly drafted the investigation conclusion: Kenneth Harrow was the last person to see the victims alive, the only individual with the means and opportunity to remove the three teenagers from the area, and the person who led police to the burial site. Based on that conclusion, the Maine State Prosecutor's Office began preparing the preliminary indictment, containing three main charges: kidnapping. Harrow transported three minors in his personal vehicle against their will, resulting in their disappearance. Supporting evidence: microfiber match, location of belongings, Harrow's admission, the kids got in the truck. Felony murder. Under Maine law, if death occurs during the commission of a serious felony, such as kidnapping, the suspect can be charged even without proof of intent to kill. Supporting evidence: burial location, no one else had contact with the boys after Harrow encountered them. Tampering with physical evidence: replacing the truck carpet, cleaning the interior, transporting the bodies to a remote location, and burying them demonstrated intent to destroy the crime scene. In addition to the three main charges, prosecutors considered adding abuse of a corpse, depending on the 1998 statutory framework. The lead prosecutor, Thomas Leary, wrote in his assessment, "The forensic chain and timeline leave no significant gaps. Every piece of data points to Harrow as the sole individual capable of committing the acts." Donnelly prepared the final pieces: crime scene maps, diagrams of the route Harrow described, quarry photographs, and the complete forensic comparison charts. Once the file was complete, she transferred the entire package to the prosecutor's office for presentation to the grand jury. After 25 years, the Millinocket 3 case was no longer a cold file. It had become a complete indictment, ready to enter the courtroom, where the truth would finally be laid bare before the entire Maine community. After the completed prosecution file was presented to the grand jury, and the formal indictment approved, the trial of Kenneth Harrow in the Millinocket 3 case was quickly scheduled at the Maine Superior Court in Augusta. Media attention had been building for weeks, not only because the case had haunted the community for a quarter-century, but because of the remarkable nature of the investigation, a cold case cracked through modern forensics, contradictory statements, and the suspect himself leading police to the graves. As soon as the trial opened, the prosecution led by Thomas Leary announced that Harrow had changed his legal strategy. Faced with the overwhelming weight of forensic evidence, the reconstructed timeline, and the fact that he had personally led police to the burial site, Harrow's defense team offered a plea deal. He would plead guilty to avoid the possibility of a felony murder charge that could carry a death-eligible sentence, depending on the era's statutes. Although Maine no longer imposes the death penalty in modern times, a federal trial could have been pursued if interstate kidnapping elements were established. To avoid that risk, Harrow agreed to plead guilty to kidnapping, felony murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. Nevertheless, the presiding judge required the prosecution to present the full sequence of events, forensics and timeline for the record, and to establish the complete truth in open court. Prosecutor Leary opened by reconstructing the entire 1998 timeline. The three teenagers left the Magic Lantern Theater at 7:45 p.m. Harrow was confirmed at the gas station at 8:14 p.m. The boys' belongings were found near Pine Ridge Stables. Evan's DNA appeared on the farm fence. Microfibers matched the interior of Harrow's Ford F-150. Soil in the backpack belonged to the Katahdin Iron Works area. All three sets of remains were recovered from the quarry pit Harrow led police to. The timeline was displayed as a 3D graphic showing Harrow's probable route from Bridgeton to Pine Ridge, and then northward to Katahdin Iron Works. Forensic experts testified one after another. The microfiber specialist explained how fibers from Noah's jacket were matched to Harrow's truck interior. The DNA analyst described extracting DNA from decomposed bone and fence surfaces, confirming identification accuracy. The geologist detailed the mineral composition of the backpack soil, and why only Katahdin Iron Works contained that exact combination. The GPR technician explained how ground-penetrating radar located the two burial sites. All testimony reinforced the conclusion: the three boys came under Harrow's control, were removed from the Millinocket area, and were buried after death. At the prosecution's request, the court viewed the interrogation footage in which Harrow admitted the boys got in the truck for a short ride, and that he headed toward Katahdin. Although he never described the exact acts that caused their deaths, his admission of direct contact and leading police to the graves was enough to seal the case. Part 4: The Second Grave. Although it contained no remains, the second pit, holding unidentified children's items, was presented to demonstrate the gravity of the crimes and the possibility that Harrow had used the site more than once. The prosecution was careful to note that no fourth victim had been confirmed, but the existence of the auxiliary pit showed premeditation and body disposal. The defense did not challenge the forensic evidence; it was too strong. Their only strategy was to request mitigation by portraying Harrow as suffering a mental health crisis at the time, but they produced no credible medical evidence. The court noted the argument, but did not consider it mitigating for sentencing purposes. After 2 days of evidentiary presentation and more than a week of deliberation, the judge pronounced sentence: life imprisonment without parole for felony murder. Additional concurrent sentences for kidnapping and tampering merged into the life term. An order for Harrow to cooperate if he possessed further information about the second grave, though this would not affect his sentence. The courtroom fell silent as the sentence was read. Some Porter and Briggs family members wept, others simply sat in silence, as if finally released from 25 years suspended between hope and despair. Harrow said nothing, as he was led away, head bowed, avoiding all eyes. For the Maine community, the sentence was not only punishment for Harrow, but the closing of a long and painful chapter. The Millinocket 3 case officially ended in court, but its ripples would continue far longer. After Kenneth Harrow was sentenced to life without parole, the Maine State Police began the final step in the Millinocket 3 case, completing the closing report and officially sealing the file after nearly 25 years. Detective Marissa Donnelly was tasked with writing the comprehensive report, compiling the original 1998 files, the 2013 reinvestigation steps, forensic results, reconstructed timeline, and the court verdict. This was not merely administrative, it was the last act to place the case into history, without omitting a single detail. Donnelly began by analyzing the entire investigative process. A key section listed the mistakes that allowed the case to remain unsolved for decades. The early focus on an unknown truck driver, the lost note about Harrow's suspicious behavior, the incomplete search of Pine Ridge stables, and the lack of technology in 1998 to analyze trace evidence. Donnelly did not blame previous investigators. Instead, she highlighted how objective limitations and outdated technology had turned the case cold for 2 decades. The report stressed that had the jacket, backpack, and soil samples been analyzed with today's methods back then, the investigation might have taken a different path. In the recommendations section, Donnelly proposed standardized long-term evidence storage for unsolved cases, digitization of all field notes to prevent loss, and periodic cold case reviews using new forensic technology. These recommendations were accepted by the Maine State Police leadership as part of lasting improvements across the entire unit. A separate section addressed the second grave, discovered at Katahdin Iron Works. It contained no remains but held children's items that did not belong to Evan, Liam, or Noah. A small glove, faded fabric scraps, and a plastic toy fragment. None of the items matched the known victims. This raised the question: was Harrow connected to another unknown case? Without DNA or human tissue, the cold case unit could not tie it to Millinocket 3. They opened a new file under a separate case number, classified as unidentified child, and placed the items on long-term watch. This meant the main case was closed, but the second pit remained an open investigation, ready to be reactivated if new technology or witnesses emerged. Donnelly's final report was printed, signed, and archived. The Millinocket 3 file was officially closed with the status, closed, conviction secured. This was the milestone the Porter and Briggs families had waited years for: official acknowledgement that their children's deaths had been solved, and the perpetrator brought to justice. Yet for the cold case unit, the file carried even greater value as precedent. It proved modern forensics could resurrect cases once thought unsolvable. Walking out of the office on the day the file was sealed, Donnelly felt both relief and quiet solemnity. She knew she had fulfilled her role in one of the heaviest cases of her career, closing a painful chapter that had lasted 2 decades. But the image of the second grave lingered in her mind. A small patch of earth, a few unidentified children's belongings, and no one knowing whose they were. Its existence remained an indelible ripple, an unsolved mystery beside a completed case. The Millinocket 3 case was officially over, the file closed, the perpetrator punished. Yet that secondary fragment quietly persisted, reminding everyone that in the world of cold cases, some questions are never answered immediately. And sometimes closing a file does not mean the story has truly ended. In the Millinocket 3 story, the tragedy of Evan, Liam, and Noah is not only a horrific crime, but a mirror reflecting issues still very close to everyday American life today. We see a series of gaps that, if filled earlier, might have revealed the truth without taking 25 years. A note about Kenneth Harrow misplaced and forgotten. Police pouring resources into a phantom out-of-town trucker, while ignoring Pine Ridge stables, where the backpack, jacket, and Evan's DNA appeared, and a community that once believed the case was hopeless. In today's world, these remind us that systems can fail, but persistence and attention to detail still have the power to change everything. On a personal level, the story is a stark reminder of vigilance. 3 teenagers simply went to the movies one evening on a familiar road, but an adult in a green F-150 turned that trip into their last. Teaching children personal safety, never accepting rides from strangers, sharing live location, and always telling family where they are, is never overcautious in today's America. At the community level, the late statement after 20 years from the man in Brunswick, a preserved gas receipt, or a new generation detective like Marisa Donnelly, willing to reread every old page shows that speaking up, keeping records, and never treating any detail as minor can save a case from being buried forever. And perhaps the most important lesson for American society is this: justice sometimes arrives very late. But it only arrives when we keep questioning what we thought was finished, dare to re-examine old assumptions, and never forget the victims who have been silenced far too long. Thank you for following to the end of the story. If you want to keep exploring decades-old cold cases that were finally solved like the Millinocket 3, please subscribe so you don't miss the next video. See you in the next stories, where we continue bringing the truth to light and remembering the victims who were never forgotten.